a more balanced Islam of a majority that promotes love, mercy and justice and forgiveness and peaceful coexistence. It gives me great pleasure in marking the initiative's third year to bring you today an exclusive programme entitled Renewing the Covenant. Today's main feature, as you will see, will be centred on a theatrical performance shortly by the Ridhaytullah theatre group entitled The Achtiname of Muhammad, focusing on the covenant of the Islamic prophet, peace be upon him, with the Christians of his time, and in particular with the monks of Mount Sinai.
So man is in search of peace. Islam's contribution to world peace. The theme and the reflection of the ayat that I have just recited is this. So Islam, the word itself literally means peace. To remind us all the time that we exist for peace. The religion of Islam exists for peace only. So in this single word, all Islamic teachings and attributes are most beautifully and concisely reflected. Islam is a religion of peace. Its teachings guarantee peace in every sphere of human interest and aspiration.
Is important because of a number of mountains. And one of the mountains is Mount Sinai, like I've just told you, but the other one is Mount Catherine, which is otherwise known by the local Arabs as Jabal Katarina. And what happens here is this saint, this Christian martyr, her body was carried from Alexandria by the angels as it goes up to the Sinai, up to this mountain of Catherine, and then eventually the monks that live down at the slopes at the foothills of this mountain, which is where the monastery is. According to the story, they then brought her body and transferred it into the monastery, and hence the monastery is known as the monastery of Saint Catherine today. The square building, which is a mosque, has a name. It's called the Mosque of Fatima, which is named after the daughter of the Holy Prophet. And it marks the spot where Moses used to meditate in his cave, or where he went for 40 days and 40 nights on top of Mount Sinai. That's where it is. It also happens to be the same spot where the Holy Prophet went to meditate on top of Mount Sinai. The Holy Prophet went through a heavenly ascension known as Mi'raj on a winged horse known as Buraq, and the footprint of Buraq is actually also imprinted at a sacred location in this area. The covenant was based on the miracle of the Holy Prophet. So the Holy Prophet went to this area, and an eagle shaded him. That's what it says. According to Christian sources, this is actually not Muslim, so according to Christian sources, the Holy Prophet had this miracle. He had shade from the eagle, and the abbot came to him and asked him for some protection for the future, for the monastery, for the monks living in the monastery. And the Holy Prophet did.
This year, we have decided to explore with you how through dialogue with the Christians of his time, and in particular the monks of Mount Sinai, Prophet Muhammad emphasized the tolerant nature of Islam. Furthermore, you will be all invited to renew the spirit of the covenant by signing a revised covenant relevant to the current day. The document will then be forwarded to Muslim country embassies in the UK, with the view of obtaining an undertaking from them, with a view of obtaining an undertaking from their respective governments to fulfill their responsibilities towards the minority non-Muslim communities in their country, in line with the terms and the spirit of the original covenant.
Long time ago, in the Arabian desert, there lived an honorable man. He was the most truthful and trustworthy man of his time. He loved everyone, and everyone loved him back.
Mohammed, is that you, my friend? It is you. It's been a long time since we last met. It must have been a whole year since I last seen you, dear friend. Please, come to the monastery and let me host you once again.
Muhammad then laid out his mat and rested under the blazing desert sun, whilst his camel watched over him. Ignoring the mouse, the eagle now perched on the camel's hump and realized Muhammad needed some shade. So it spread its wings over his face to provide him with some shade. The eagle, the mouse, and the camel all lay quietly beside Muhammad, watching over him whilst he was asleep.
O Lord Almighty! O Lord Almighty! What am I seeing? This is a miracle in all of its beauty. O monks of St. Catherine! O monks of St. Catherine! Hurry, gather yourselves, for the prophecy written within our ancient scriptures has finally come true. These ancient scriptures that I hold within my hand herald the coming of a great new leader of a great new religion. And I have no doubt in my mind that you will be this great new leader. Garen, before you bring this great new religion, I want to ask you for your protection of this great monastery and all of its monks living within it. Please, Garen, do this honor unto us. Muhammad, before he became the great prophet, dictated the terms to this contract during his visit to the monastery of St. Catherine. Number 1, all Christians, and not just the Christians of St. Catherine, are to be included within this contract. 2, Christians should be viewed as part of my ummah, meaning community. 3, I am personally responsible for all Christians till the end of days. 4, they are to be judged by Christian law. 5, they shall not be charged any tax, for the monks are spiritual and charitable people. 6, the monks are to be granted political autonomy and the self-to-right rule. 7, the monks are to be granted freedom of any travel restrictions. 8, they are free to build their churches upon Muslim land, and Muslims should help them in maintaining them. 9, Muslims should provide for the monks, be kind to them, and protect them during times of war. 10, monks are to be excluded from military service. And number 11, this is the promise of the Prophet, and none of his nation shall go against it till the end of days. Muhammad then placed the entire print of his hand onto the contract. He did this because each of his 5 fingers represented a member of his household, Ahlul Bayt. He did this, the first being Muhammad himself, the second being his brother Ali, the third being his daughter Fatima, and the fourth and the fifth being his two grandsons, Hassan and Hussein. Therefore, this contract is not only the promise of the Prophet himself, but the promise of his household. This then became known as the Achtiname of Muhammad.
It's been duly documented from the 7th century all the way to the 21st century. It's found in hundreds of sources. It's found in Christian sources. It's also found in Muslim sources. It's been confirmed by most of the rulers who've governed over the Muslim world from the 7th century until the fall of the Ottoman Empire. It was authenticated by thousands of scholars over the past 1400 years. So it's only really during the past century, as a result of the downfall of the Ottoman Empire, that many Muslims have become oblivious to these documents. They used to be commonly known, but unfortunately there's been a disconnect in terms of the transmission. Now, obviously I have discussed my findings with scholars from different schools of thought, with Sunni ulama and grand muftis, and with Shiite scholars. Most of the scholars with whom I have interacted, those who have examined all of the evidence, have come to the conclusion that yes, indeed, this document is genuine. I gathered in the United Arab Emirates, when was that? It was about a year ago. And there were a series of meetings that were organized at the Taba Foundation, which is headed by Sheikh Al-Habib Ali Al-Jifri. On one day, I discussed the significance of these documents to Arab diplomats from many different countries. On another day, the day was devoted to meeting Arab academics and intellectuals and discussing these documents. One day, I sat down with leading Muslims from throughout the Muslim world. All of the grand muftis gathered there. They came from Syria, they came from Afghanistan, they came from Algeria, they came from all kinds of different countries, and I presented my findings to them. This was a very, very long presentation, essentially the equivalent of defending a doctoral dissertation. So after spending hours with these high-ranking Sunni ulama, the leaders of the Sunni world, the equivalent of the Grand Ayatollahs of the Sunnis, they came to the conclusion that there is nothing that we have heard here today that contradicts what our understanding of the Quran and the Sunnah, and they gave me their blessings and their support. And I've had the same response with scholars from different schools of thought. So knowledge of these documents are spreading. It's not as if they are not known. They are known to people who are involved in highly specialized research. In the Sunni world, there is a great scholar by the known who passed away by the name of Muhammad Hamidullah. And Muhammad Hamidullah was both a Western academic and a traditional Sunni alim. He compiled a book called Al-Watha'iq, in which he gathered all of the letters and treaties and covenants of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. There are approximately 300 letters of the Prophet that survive. These are documents that have been transmitted in books of hadith, in books of fiqh, in books of seerah, so books of traditions, books of biography, books of jurisprudence. So they're scattered. So you really have to master all of these areas in order to come across these documents. But he did us a great service by gathering them together in one volume, which is probably 1,000 pages. And so these documents are known to a certain segment of scholars. On the Shiite side, there is a famous scholar who also passed away. These are all 20th century scholars by the name of Ayatollah Ahmadi Miyanji. Okay, and those of you who've studied in the house in Qum, I'm sure you know him well. Some of my colleagues were actually his students. One of my friends studied Akhlaq under Ayatollah Ahmadi Miyanji. He compiled a book called Makatib al-Rasul. And this is a commentary on the letters and treaties and covenants of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. He essentially took this 1,000-page compilation by Muhammad Hamidullah and analyzed all of these documents in order to determine their authenticity, in order to interpret their meaning and their significance. On the Shiite side, I would definitely recommend anyone who has any questions about these documents to refer to Makatib al-Rasul. And hopefully, inshallah, knowledge of these documents will spread, they will be studied more, and ordinary people will become more familiar with them. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Morrow. Other questions? Come to you,
This question is for Dr. Morrow. What inspired you to research and write the Six Covenants?
Well, what inspired me? I can only say that it was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. God Almighty works in mysterious ways. And as a scholar, I don't necessarily set out or have the intention to write a book about a certain thing. And so the story of how I came across these documents is very interesting. I first came across the Achtiname, or the Covenant of the Prophet Muhammad with the monks of Mount Sinai, when I was a teenager. Actually, it's one of the first documents I came across after I embraced Islam. Now, this document has been cited, as I mentioned, over the centuries. It's found in hundreds and hundreds of different sources. So one of the first books that I read included a copy of this document in English. And so when I started university, this would be in 1990, one of the first courses that I took was a course on philosophy of religion. And I proposed to write an essay in that course on jihad in Islam. In that essay, I quoted this Achtiname of Muhammad, this covenant with the monks of Mount Sinai, because it had all kinds of interesting implications to the study of jihad and how Muslims should treat non-Muslims. So I was familiar with an English translation of this document. As the years passed on, I decided to, so that was in 1990. It was in, I would say 2012 or something. I decided to update that initial essay and expand upon it. And I was no longer satisfied with just having an English translation of the document. So I set out to locate the Arabic original. And so this led me on a long quest looking for this document. I came across a document which I was told, this is a copy of the covenant in Arabic. And then I realized that, hey, it was actually different. And it was a covenant of the Prophet published in 1630 in Paris by a Maronite scholar by the name of Gabriel Sionita. And Gabriel Sionita had published this document, which had been brought back from the Middle East by another priest by the name of Pacifique de Provins. Pacifique de Provins was a French monk, and during his travels in the Middle East, in a monastery, he found a letter of the Prophet Muhammad. It was brought back to France, It was published in Arabic, it was published in French, in Latin, and then in German. It actually became a bestseller for centuries. So this document was very, very well known to Europeans for many centuries. So I had found another covenant of the Prophet that had been long forgotten and ignored. So I continued my quest. And then I found another document. But no, this was actually a covenant of the Prophet with the Christians of Najran that was found in the Beit al-Hikmah by a monk by the name of Habib. And so I'm looking for the original covenant with the monks of Mount Sinai, but then I find the covenant of the Christians with the world, and then I find one of the oldest versions of the covenant of the Prophet Muhammad with the Christians of Najran, and I continue my quest. And then I come across another document that was recorded in Assyrian sources. And so some of the different Christian communities had copies of the letters of the Prophet. So I came across the one with the Assyrians. And then I found that there was a scholar by the name of Leon Arpi, who was doing archival research in the Cathedral of New Julfa in Isfahan, in Iran, during the early 20th century. And in the archives of this cathedral in Isfahan, he found a letter of the Prophet, a covenant of protection for the Christians of Persia, which he documented and he published in the United States. And so I set out to find one document, and I ended up uncovering many, many different documents. Finally, I come across a picture of the covenant of the Prophet Muhammad with the monks of Mount Sinai. And so I contact the author of the book, and I say, is there any way I can get a high-resolution copy of this document? And she says, well, you should contact Father Justin. At that point, I assumed that Father Justin was maybe some Irish priest living in New York who maybe went on a trip and saw a copy of this document and took a picture. And so I email Father Justin, and I say, Father Justin, is there any way you can give me a high-resolution copy of the Achtiname of Muhammad? And he said, of course. Let me go downstairs. Let me go downstairs, I thought. It was at that point that I realized that I was corresponding with Father Justin of Sinai, one of the holy fathers from the monastery of St. Catherine in Egypt. And they have had a copy of the covenant of the Prophet on display in their monastery since the 7th century. And it is the pride of their monastery. They display it and they show it to all of the pilgrims who go to the monastery. So he went downstairs to the lobby of the monastery, took a picture of it, and sent it to me. And so, what was initially just an attempt to find the Arabic original of one document ended up, revealing the existence of half a dozen of these documents. And since that time, I've continued my research, and I found that the Armenian Christians have letters of the Prophet in their patriarchate, that the Syriac Orthodox Christians also have letters of the Prophet that survive to this day in their monasteries, that there were other copies in Turkey, that there were other copies in other parts of the world, that there were letters of the Prophet that were kept by the Zoroastrians or the Parsis in India. So, we plan, but Allah is definitely the best of planners. So I think that contextualizes a little bit the history of this book and this research.
Fabulously insightful. Another question here?
Thank you, Dr. Morrow. Does this imply that the Prophet could read and write before he got his prophethood? If he was writing these covenants? And if he could, then there's some people who say that he was illiterate. And that's one of the things that we've heard several times. So did the Prophet write these covenants, or did he dictate them for somebody else to write?
All right, this is an excellent question, a very pertinent question. It's one that I hear quite often. Was the Prophet literate, or was the Prophet illiterate? A lot of this revolves around the meaning of the word ummi, that he was an ummi prophet. Ummi comes from which means mother. Ummi means maternal. And women tended to be illiterate. And so the term ummi has the sense of being illiterate. So some scholars, when they examine that word, they take it at face value, and they say that the Prophet was an ummi, he was illiterate. Okay? The problem is that the word ummi doesn't simply mean illiterate. It also means unlettered. It also means a person who is not schooled. It also means a person who does not have a formal education. So simply because one does not have a formal education does not necessarily imply that one is also illiterate. The term ummi is also used in Arabic to describe a Gentile, a person who is not of Jewish ancestry. And so another interpretation of the word ummi is that he was a prophet to the Gentiles, right? He was not from of Jewish ancestry. So that's another interpretation. The city of Mecca is also known as al-Qura, or the mother of villages. And the inhabitants of Mecca were also known as ummis, a person from al-Qura. So as a result, that ummi prophet thing can simply mean you are a Meccan prophet, you are a prophet from Mecca. Now, our scholars have different opinions on the issue of the illiteracy of the prophet. There are some who hold that the prophet was indeed literate before Revelation and obviously after Revelation. Some of our scholars believe that the prophet was indeed illiterate before the revelation, but miraculously became literate when the wahi or the revelation came down. After all, he was commanded to iqra, in order to read. And some people would say, well, didn't he practice what he preached? So, if he was told to iqra, it was because he was able miraculously to read from that point. There are also some ahadith in early sources that indicate that the prophet corrected certain documents. There was one point where a change was requested in a document and the prophet himself scratched it out, which would imply that he understood the writing, he could find the word, and he could change it. Now, we also have our traditions, which are the traditions from the A'imah, peace be upon them. What exactly did the Imams say about the literacy of the Prophet? Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam was asked whether the Prophet was illiterate, and he said, Astaghfirullah. He said the Prophet could read and write in 70 languages. And there are all kinds of ahadith in our sources that say that the Prophet and the Imams were proficient in all of the languages of the world. And some people can say, oh, these are legends, and this is pious nonsense. But no, even if we examine books like Sahih Muslim and Sahih Bukhari, there are ahadith in which the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, speaks in Persian to Hassan and Hussein. And there's a chapter that says on the permissibility of speaking Persian to one's children. So hold on a second. If he was using Persian with Hassan and Hussein, and perhaps also with Salman al-Farsi, it seems quite feasible and plausible that he spoke that language. The Prophet used many different scribes. Many of the scribes that he used at the beginning of his mission were Jewish scribes. And he actually asked one of his companions to go and learn Aramaic and Hebrew and the languages of the non-Muslims. So the Prophet was dictating letters in many languages. Some of those letters were written down using the Hebrew script. Some of those letters were written in Arabic. We also know that some of the early letters of the Prophet were also issued in Greek and other languages as well. So that gives you a broad idea of the issue of the literacy or illiteracy of the Prophet. As for that, the Achtiname of Muhammad and that account. Now, it is related that Muhammad, in his youth, when he was involved as a trader, when he was a caravan leader. He used to supply many different communities and different monasteries, and that he was well known to these monks of southern Egypt, the Sinai Peninsula. In that case, they asked him, one of their leaders foretold that he would become a great and powerful man, and he asked him to protect the monastery. And he said, and according to these accounts, he said, well, what am I going to write? I cannot write. And they said, just give us our promise, just give us your promise. And so he dipped his hand in ink, and he stamped a piece of paper as a signature to signify that he was indeed protecting them. And as the years passed, and he received revelation, and he created the Islamic State, there was a delegation that was sent from the monastery of St. Catherine. They brought this document with his palm print and told him, Ya Rasulullah, do you remember the promise that you made to us? And he says, yes, indeed, and it is my intention to honor it. It was at that point that all of those terms were dictated, and they were dictated to Imam Ali, who was one of the scribes. But the Prophet used about 30 different scribes.
One final question here, or last two questions.
This question is directed to Dr. John Andrew. What is the view of Christians on Achtiname? What should we do with it as a young Muslim?
Okay, this is a very good question. Now, the Christians of the Middle East are very familiar with these documents. Now, the Prophet granted many covenants of protection to the different Christian communities. He gave covenants of protection to the Greek Orthodox Christians, to the Armenian Christians, to the Syriac Orthodox Christians, to the Jacobites, to the Nestorians, to the Christians of Persia. He also gave treaties of protection to the Zoroastrians. Now, these letters have been passed down over the centuries by these communities. So you're not going to find a patriarch or a monk or a priest in these communities who are not familiar. They are familiar with these documents. They are convinced that they are authentic, and they never forgot about them. There's a monastery in Greece called Mount Athos, the monastery of Simonopetra. They have copies of the covenant of the Prophet. There are monasteries in Syria with copies. There are patriarchates in Jerusalem with copies of these documents. The same thing in Turkey, the same thing in Persia, and other parts of the world. So when I approached these Christian leaders and to discuss these documents, well, they've always known about them. All right? So it's nothing new. And so these Christian leaders in the Middle East, they know full well that people like ISIS and Nusra do not represent Islam and do not represent the Prophet. They know because they have a letter of protection from the Prophet. And they know how the Prophet demanded that his followers treat non-Muslims. So the issue with the Christians of the Middle East, well, that's not a problem. The problem is with the Christians in the Western world. There was a time when the Christians in Western Europe, in France and England and so on, were familiar with these documents. They were familiar with them until the rise of secularism and so on in Europe. So the problem is sensitizing and familiarizing the Christians of the West with these documents. I think our responsibility is to share these documents. As the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, said, these documents are binding until Yawm al-Qiyamah. They are valid and they are obligatory until the end of times. So we need to revive these documents, resurrect these documents, and share them with Muslims and also with Christians.
We'll just take one last question for the day.
In a sense, my question and comment maybe follows on from what you just said, Dr. Morrow. And in a sense, it's for both of you, for the Sheikh really, from maybe whose world I come from more closely. He was talking about our common humanity and godliness, about the scriptures, about interpretation and understanding and hermeneutics, in which I have a little knowledge myself, and where I work, and the limitations of context. I think you were talking about historical context. I'd like to widen that to the new historical, post-1960s, cultural, feminist, post-colonial context. And what, in fact, drew me here was the word covenant being an understanding of something that is common to all three, the Christian, Hebrew and Islamic faiths. And what we can draw from this research in the value of dialogue between our faiths on the concept of covenant, and perhaps some new ideas and thoughts that we can take from today, really, in that context of using the word covenant.
Dr. Morrow?
Yes, the interesting thing about the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, is that he wasn't concerned simply with how Muslims should govern themselves. He was concerned with how Muslims should deal with other communities as well. And this is something that we see very clearly from the first covenant, which is the covenant of Medina, or the Constitution of Medina, which was made not just for Muslims, but for the entire community in Medina, which included at the beginning a minority of Muslims and a majority of non-Muslims, who included especially numerous Jewish tribes. There were also polytheists who were part of the early community in Medina. However, when the Prophet prepared this constitution, it applied to all of these people. So they were united as citizens of that state. Identity was no longer based on your race, or your social class, or your kinship, or tribe, or anything like that. Identity was based on citizenship and the rights that were shared by all of these people. He described, when speaking about his community, he said that they are one community, that they are one ummah. And so the Muslims were responsible for protecting the Jews. The Jews were responsible for protecting the Muslims, and so on. The word covenant, it's something that we find in the Old Testament. It's something that we find in the New Testament. It's a covenant. It's a contract between God and between humanity. And this is definitely something we see in these covenants of the Prophet Muhammad. He is explicit in these documents that they were the product of revelation, that God told him to do this, that God dictated to him that he should do these things. So it wasn't just something from his own personal initiative. In a certain sense, they could be compared to Hadith Qudsi, or these traditions of the Prophet, in which the Prophet says that it's not just the Prophet speaking, it's the Prophet saying that God told him, that, Qala Allah, right, that God said such and such a thing. There was a time when Muslims were really concerned about trying to convert other people, trying to convert Christians and convert Jews and so on. I think most Muslims have abandoned that idea and have replaced that with the idea of dialogue. So how do we build bridges? Well, I think these covenants, these documents are very useful in that regard, because they're non-threatening. When you approach a Christian person, you approach a Jewish person, and you make it very clear you're not interested in converting them or anything like that. And you say, look here, I have this treaty that the Prophet made between Muslims and Jews, or between Muslims and Christians. And this is how he said that we should treat you. So immediately you are building bridges. And anyone who examines these documents, is there anything objectionable? All right? So, he guarantees the right to life. Now, who on earth would ever object to that? People have the right to live. Okay, ISIS takes issue with that. They think that, people who disagree with them have no right to live. So the right to life. The right to religious freedom. Freedom of association. These covenants protect religious institutions and religious buildings. They protect churches and monasteries. He protects these communities from excessive taxation. He prohibits forced coercion. And he insists that a Christian Muslim who marries a Muslim man should not be compelled to abandon her religion. And she has the right to go to church, and that her husband cannot prevent her from doing that. So, in terms of the level of rights and privileges that were being provided, they are comparable to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Bill of Rights that we see develop in the Western world. They are comparable to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, with one difference, is that these are divinely ordained rights. And I think that's something that we can build upon.
Thank you, Dr. Morrow.
We're indebted to Dr. Andrew for his wonderful work, and may God bless him abundantly to continue with such good work, and that we can benefit and take encouragement from that and build on. Thank you.
Yes, I would just like to add that we have many scholars of the text, but very few scholars of the context, and we definitely need to do some more work in that area. As for Hinduism, I could just point to the Vedas, which say, God has many names, but the wise call him one. So there are different, if you look at any religious tradition in the world, you will definitely find elements of truth. So I think we can close on that positive note. Ilahi Ameen, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.
Dr. Morrow, Sheikh Ida, can I thank you for taking the time out today and joining us and enlightening us with some fantastic research, knowledge, and no doubt we wish you well in your future endeavors and research moving forward, as Sheikh Ida had mentioned. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us again. Thank you so much.